the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, we are grateful to gather here this evening to learn about the beauty of your creation and how artists bring forth the truth of our faith through cooperating with you, the source of all beauty, all truth, and all that is good. We're grateful for the talent that Andrew has shared with us in creating this image of St. Jerome, which will inspire us for generations to come to recognize the truth in Scripture, to grow in love of all that you have revealed to us through Christ. Bless all those who are gathered here today, our parish and our school. We ask this all through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
St. Jerome,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
And Father Scott, it's tough act to follow here. So this piece of art, of course, was commissioned by our parent volunteer corps in honor of our former principal, Danny Flynn, who, as a teacher and principal, was here for quite a while. And I think it says a lot about the school that the way that we chose to honor this leader was through a commissioned work of art, and specifically a work of art that honors our patron saint. Not many schools do this sort of thing. I don't know of other grade schools that have done this. I'm sure there's ones out there. I have never heard of it. Right? So it really, I think, focuses on the Christocentrism that we have here, and the focus on sanctity, and also the focus on beauty. Beauty is the heart of the St. Jerome educational plan, and this is a way of living this out, right? The educational plan that says that everything that we do teaches something, and we're teaching our children about the centrality of beauty and the call to holiness, which is the reason for this school. Before coming to St. Jerome Academy, I was actually somewhat familiar with Andrew's work already. He has donated a print of a work that he did over at Our Lady of Sorrows Church. During the pandemic, they opened up a food pantry with their former convent. And this is Mother Mary Lang, who is now venerable. And she's a woman who was born in Haiti, spent some time in Cuba, ended up in Baltimore. And she founded the Oblate Sisters of Providence. And a little bit of a tangent, but I think appropriate during National Black Catholic History Month. She founded a school, several schools, but one of which, St. Francis Academy. It was founded in 1828. It's still there. So almost 200 years later, her school is still there. So a great way for us to honor our Maryland's Catholic heritage with displaying this holy woman in our school. Of course, we have this piece of art to celebrate tonight. Looking forward to hearing from Andrew about the specifics of this piece of art, which is St. Jerome at Study. And I'm looking forward just to hearing more about his thoughts on beauty, Catholic aesthetics, sacred art. We had the opportunity to have coffee a couple weeks ago. Was really just impressed and even more excited that we were able to bring him to speak to all of us. So, Andrew, please go ahead.
I want to start off with a clarification. So there actually are other schools doing the same thing, but only after because they heard about it from St. Jerome's. So as St. Jerome's it's a catalyst for other things. And I mean, I heard about the school before we moved to this area. And then when I've traveled and spoken at schools and such, and I'll bring up St. Jerome's, people are like, the St. Jerome's? Like, it really has such a name. And so there's been, since I sent this painting out, there's been several schools actually that have reached out to me about doing something, and in the same model. So organically, and thanks to Angela and others, this beautiful model of parents coming together to commission something and then allowing me to work with the school on the imagery is a really beautiful expression of what art patronage can look like, right? Because the time that it takes to put into a painting, not every individual can pay for something and pay for an artist to do it well. But if we can come together and pay for something and then put it into a communal space that we all love, like a school or parish, it is a wonderful way to kind of reinvent the wheel of patronage that really needs to be reinvented. So I want to thank everyone who's involved with this commission, for your treasure and your thought in making this happen. And thank you also for these news commissions that I'm getting from these schools. It really is kicking off, hopefully, another model that St. Jerome's has provided for the larger classical and Catholic school community. So I wanted to talk today about a few things, and I was hoping, since we have our group, we can maybe do a little bit more discussion. So I'll try to pause a little bit, but also please feel free to interrupt me. I guess raise your hand. We can pretend like we're in a classroom, but raise your hand, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say anytime throughout this little talk. Let me pull out my notes here. Try to remember what I'm talking about. I did this the other day. I was the best man at a wedding, and I brought my speech in a notebook. And right before I got up there, I realized I brought up the wrong notebook. Luckily, my wife had the right one in the car, but this is the right one. All right, so what we're gonna try to do tonight is define art, because that'll be quick and easy. So we're gonna start with a discussion about art, and I'm gonna present maybe a different way of art than you're used to thinking about it. I would argue it's a traditional way and the Catholic way. And we'll look at some sources for that, and maybe that'll be a point of discussion, either in the beginning or at the end. Second, I'm gonna show just some of the kind of preparatory images to demonstrate the way in which an image will unfold. I just picked a few of the sketches. There was probably something like 50 sketches and preparatory studies that went into this final piece. Stacks of papers, of drawings and iterations. And so I want to kind of show you just some of the studies to show the way in which, and how I work, it's like you kind of have a kernel that'll come in as the concept for the piece, but it really takes a lot to cultivate and grow it into a final piece. And there's all these little stages along the way. So I'll show you a few of those, show you studies, but also some of the inspiration and the things that I drew on for some of the aspects in here. I should mention that if you get bored, I hope your eyes will wander this direction, and you'll come up with some good questions, because at the end I would love to hear, before I really kind of talk about the piece as a piece, I would like to first, at the end, hear what you guys have to think about it. It's always nice to hear that, before I try to push onto you what I tried to do, to see if it was successful in any way. And then we will talk just briefly about the kind of 3 stages of image making. We're going to look at some paintings from El Greco and a passage from Gregory of Nyssa that I've just found personally helpful. I hope that might be practical. Usually none of what I talk about ends up being practical, but that I hope will be a practical thing, especially as parents, as you think about trying to form your children as image makers. And I suppose I should make a little argument why I think that is a necessity as a human being, and especially as a Christian. And as I mentioned at the end, maybe we can do a little discussion and look at the painting itself. So, to begin with the modest endeavor of trying to define an idea of art, when I say art, people usually use that as a noun, right? There's always this question like, what is art? Is that art? Does that qualify as art? That would have been like a foreign conversation to the pre-modern world. They never thought about art objects. Up until the early modern period, that was the case. If you go to a museum like the Cloisters in New York, which is a medieval art collection, all the things hanging on the walls and in the collections were not created as art objects to look at. Very few things were even framed and stuck on a wall just as such. What you're looking at is a spoon that's been carved beautifully. What you're looking at is usually a liturgical object, an object celebrating a feast, celebrating a memorial, the seasons. They were the objects of everyday life, and they weren't made as art, they were made with art. There wasn't this distinction between an object that is used for its beauty in a facile sense and its utility. There was this sense in which, in order to bring something into existence, it is worth making it beautiful. And that's actually what makes it real. So if I'm gonna have a spoon, I'm gonna carve a spoon, I might as well make a beautiful spoon. We don't have that as much in the modern world. I remember this when I was looking for like a high chair for our firstborn, and it was like, why are all high chairs so ugly? There's certain objects we've decided, okay, those are gonna be ugly and those are gonna be nice. And it's like, most of the stuff's ugly. As we were driving in New Hampshire, we passed this beautiful wooden high chair, and so we had my brother and sister-in-law drive it down, and it matches our old set that we have. So we did end up well there. So to get to the earlier understanding, art is a virtue. So if you look, I guess the clearest place to look would be Aristotle's Ethics, book 4. He's talking about the intellectual virtues, and he talks about the speculative virtues, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and then he gets to the practical intellectual virtues, and he outlines prudence and art. And whereas prudence is ordered to the good of the individual, art is a virtue that enables one to make something. It is ordered to the good of the object. And this distinction between prudence and art as being kind of parallel virtues but distinct, Aquinas will pick up on this too, and it'll help explain why so many good artists are terrible people. So many of us, good Catholics, we want our artists to be saints, and then we read about them and we're like, oh boy. And it's because those two things are different. Prudence and art are different, but they're analogous. Because whereas art is ordered to the good of the object being made, I can be really good at making a chair. That does not make me a good person. But there is something in the making of the chair and the kind of running up against reality that is involved in making a chair that will translate into the virtue of prudence, because the virtue of prudence is about making a good man. And so one of my arguments for why art needs to be recovered in school, and a more expansive notion of art beyond the fine arts to include shop class and the common arts, which I think are actually more foundational to what we call the fine arts, is how can you expect to have someone know how to make a good life or make a polis in terms of politics if they don't know how to make a chair? Some of these people I talk to on the Hill that are coming off and they're writing all this legislation, they don't know how to do anything. It's how do you don't know how to make anything. You don't know how to do anything. And if you did, you would know that there's a certain amount of negotiation, there's a certain amount of humility, there's a certain amount of study that goes into learning how to make something, because you're subjugated to what's the material that you're working with. But in politics, it's not like that. It's all rhetoric, and you can say whatever you want, and as long as you have the right soundbite, blah, 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 blah. So here's a brief little quote. I'll just let you read it from Aquinas. It's kind of a double quote because he quotes Aristotle up top, who's the philosopher, just to prove I'm not making this up. Here's some beautiful quotes from a really fascinating thinker, Ananda Coomaraswamy, worth looking up his work. He was curator of the MFA in Boston, and I think has some of the best understandings of traditional art coming from an Indian background, but also a student of Plato and others. So he writes, art is nothing tangible. We cannot call a painting art, as the words artifact and artificial may imply. The thing made is a work of art, made by art, but not itself art. The art remains in the artist, and is the knowledge by which things are made. The artist is not a special kind of man, but every man is a special kind of artist. So he's making the argument that any act of making takes an art, and as we'll see, there's many types of different making, and art, being a virtue, like all the other virtues, is native to man and is latent in man, is a God-given gift to man, and the perfection of man requires the perfection of the virtues, including art. So we're all called to be artists. Turns out, surprisingly or not surprising, I think one of the best definitions of art comes from the Catechism, which writes in 2501, arising from talent given by the Creator and from man's own effort, art is a form of practical wisdom, uniting knowledge and skill to give form to the truth of reality and a language accessible to sight or hearing. To the extent that it is inspired by truth and love of beings, art bears a certain likeness to God's activity and what he has created. I bolded created because we're going to return to that very briefly, the relationship between art and creativity. My very simplistic way of summarizing some of these quotes and these understandings, having spent time with some of these texts, is a little formula wherein art has 3 elements. You need an artist, you need a concept, and you need a medium. So we're gonna keep coming back to that. You need an artist, a concept, and a medium. An artist is simply someone who practices the virtue of art. A maker, a human being, we're the only ones who practice art of creation. A concept, which is a really rich word that developed in the English language that I think resolves a lot of philosophical discussion about ideas and divine ideas and forms and where they come from. But we're going to simply use it to mean something conceived in the mind. So we're using the word concept as something conceived in the mind, and a medium would be the material out of which the thing is made. So the way in which those interact is the artist who receives a concept, makes a concept in a certain way, but conceives a concept is probably the best verb, and orders the medium to the concept. So to give some examples, we'll talk briefly about a painter, a carpenter, and a lawyer. And these are kind of classical examples. That's what I like it, especially the carpenter, meaning they show up in Aristotle and Thomas and people like that. So with the painter, he has a mental image, and he orders his material, the paints, the water, whatever he's using, in this case cut paper, to orders that material towards that concept. And that the materials then bear the image of the concept, and that's what holds them together as an object. A carpenter, this was fun because this was actually, if you've read the St. Jerome's educational plan, in the beginning they have this quote about someone building a school. And you see that in Augustine and people like using someone building a home or a carpenter. So a carpenter building a box, what he needs is his materials, the wood, the nails, that's the medium. But he also needs like a design in his head of what that box will look like. And then he's ordering his materials to that idea, that design in his head. Even if he has a paper design, he has to take that design and it has to reside in his mind in a certain way. And even if I'm painting a still life of something in front of me, I'm still taking in that still life and it has to reside in my mind in a certain way. So it is still, I like to say all art is conceptual art, even if that's, let's say, cooking. You have to have some idea of what you're getting at. And if someone does it, you can tell. It doesn't. And a sign of good art to me is one of the criteria, and it might just be basic, is like, does it hold together? So for a chair, that's quite obvious. It doesn't hold together. But even like a dish, you're like, this was a bad dish because there's like 7 different flavors coming at me. But a good dish has like either a really strong central flavor or like a first rich, bold note, and then a second and a third that's ordered hierarchically. But it comes together and you're like, that's a real dish. I really got something there. A good wine is like that. And you want this combination of unity and diversity in that experience. Lastly, a lawyer who's making an argument. He has a syllogism in his mind, and his medium is his words and his gestures. And I like these 3 examples because they also illustrate the 3 kind of main, somewhat arbitrary but somewhat true, categorization of the arts. You have the fine arts, so-called fine arts, the so-called servile or industrial arts, and carpenter, and the lawyer be the liberal arts in terms of, that would be rhetoric. So almost all of human activity will now fall under this nest of arts because making is so central to who the human being is, right? In Genesis, he's really presented as the maker. Especially in Genesis 2, there's this beautiful imagery, if you can picture it, and we're going to come back to this idea of a mountain with a garden on the top. And it's a mountain because you have 4 rivers and they all flow outwards, so it must be a mountain, with a garden on the top. And man resides in this garden. He's called to name the animals. He's made an image of God. I like to say he has a piece of God's mind. And the reason to have a piece of your mind is, imagine you want to build I was looking at my own little Bible, and it had a little note and said, one of the translations is like pleasure garden. And it was making the point, it's for God's pleasure, not man. Man is the gardener for God's garden. But he must have a piece of God's mind in him, in the same way that when I have a gardener or I have a contractor, I have to be like, this is what I want. This is what I want it to look like. So man is given that design of what the garden is supposed to be, and he's supposed to cultivate it. And he has the names of the animals. It's this kind of place of the concepts. We'll come back to that. So now to go into just the making of this piece. When I was approach to do this piece. It's kind of a difficult work art because sometimes it just, like I mentioned, good art will come together. Sometimes it just doesn't, right? There's something like being a gardener, which I do. So my week, I spend half my time working with plants and half my time in the studio. I found that to be my perfect balance. I was doing full-time studio work and it just wasn't sustainable on many levels, especially mentally and spiritually. But spending time with plants has been really good for me, and a shovel and no technology. When you're working with plants, there's so much that you can do, but there's a way in which you are aware of your limitations and the gift of providence, right? You can do all you want for the plants, but they could just die because it was a drought like this year. The same with art. There's stuff that you can do. There's kind of an artist who I appreciate, a Catholic artist, 20th century, Carl Schmitt, not the political philosopher. He's a painter. Carl Schmitt used the idea of the wind, the ritual and the wind. And he said, you show up and you enact the ritual. And this is obviously like liturgical language. So what we have control of is you show up and you enact the ritual, you do the thing. And in so much as you do it, and it's not like because you do A, B happens, but something about doing the ritual will sometimes invite the wind, will invite the inspiration. And so I find myself, sometimes when I'm talking to patrons or something, like, yeah, I can do this. But sometimes there's a way in which that won't, especially early on in my career, sometimes you just didn't receive a clear enough concept for it to really come together. There's certain ways now that I've learned to develop the concept. One of them is learning existing iconographic language. So when I was asked about doing the St. Jerome's period, I already automatically had, maybe 10 pictures of St. Jerome's in my head. And there's certain ways in which he's depicted. He has the lion, which is just a wonderful story. I want to do a kid's book one day of that. His hat is usually off. And this whole type here is a pattern that is used for the evangelists. Let me see if is that the next slide? Let's see. There you go. So it's used for, in the divine office, there's kind of these little patterns. So if someone is a martyr, or if someone is a doctor of the church, or if someone is, these different kind of character types, the office will have certain prayers. There's the same thing visually. So if if a saint is a scribe or artist, they will often be depicted in this form. It's this and it's not just an arbitrary thing. There's something about this composition that is just really true and good. We have different saints here. I'll just highlight one. This is Hildegard von Bingen, the famous 13th century, 11th, 12th century possibly, composer and musician and botanist, I believe, and doctor. She's everything. I think she's a doctor of the church now. But to me, this was a really resonant imagery. You see it particularly in this one because there's two things happening. There's inspiration coming. I think it's cropped, but there's these flames of fire. But then she's also writing. So I knew that's where I wanted to kind of start with my little sketch. And often you'll also see this kind of architectural setting in the background, which in one way represents the New Jerusalem, but also will often be used to designate a specific area. So there'll be a particular abbey, but it's also very fanciful and fairy tale-esque. And so again, the architecture is used as a kind of language to kind of create this space. It reminds me of, if anyone's familiar with Tolkien and his idea of subcreation, iconography to me is very similar to Tolkien in terms of Tolkien is trying to make a plausible little world that is contained, that has its own rules and laws, and you have elves and dwarves and things like that. And it has its own rules. He would be obsessive about, oh no, that couldn't happen in Middle Earth. That's not allowed, but this is allowed. Iconography is very much like that. There's a certain way in which trees are depicted. There's a certain way in which perspective is, and it's not real in the sense that it looks like that out there, but it's real to the space. There's an integrity and there's rules to iconographic depictions. I wanted to show some examples of ways in which I draw on other sources and how that is also native to sacred art. Up here, I wish I had the information on hand, but I don't. But this is actually from a pagan little relief. I believe that's Apollo up there. And you have the angels, the gods, it's all there. This is Christ at the bottom. So Christian art takes up the pagan iconography. And it's not that they take it up or they appropriate it, it's that was prepared for Christ, right? That whole rich tradition of Egyptian to Greek to Roman is this like one long table setting for Christ to show up in the first century. And so there's something about first century art that was so ready for Christ to enter into it, and that is demonstrated in the way in which Christian art very naturally drops into that. We forget so much of the iconography of the early church up to the 13th century, and you still see it in the East, is very Roman. Christ is shown in Roman senator garbs. I believe it's senator. And he's portrayed really as Roman. We kind of miss that because we're so used to seeing that as that's how Jesus dressed, but he didn't wear that. Or if he did, it'd probably be a little bit strange. So you can see the direct. I love this. It's almost like, okay, we have Apollo, and it's like, all right, thank you, Apollo. Like scene change. We're putting Christ there, and it's because there was something about the cosmos that they really understood. They just didn't understand who was at the top of the hierarchy. It's really like the ultimate coup, in a way. Here's some other examples of the same type with the Christological symbol of the cross. Here's a contemporary example from a fantastic icon carver, Jonathan Pajot, who's worth looking up for his various commentaries and YouTube videos. Really, I think, a profound thinker in a lot of ways. You can see how he included that at the top. So when I'm looking at, in terms of inspiration, I'll gather maybe 40 images for something. I'm looking in terms of visually what's depicted, but also abstractly, geometrically, what works. So one example that I really loved is the scarab. All of what I'm talking about is inspiration for this up here, if you can see. Right, so we have the Christ in the center. I'll go back so you can see the similarities. The angels holding thing. In the middle, if you maybe at the end you can see it a little clearer, but there's a wreath, there's a laurel. That's a very classical image of victory, of the triumph of the emperor, and that of course is taken up in Christianity as the crowning of Christ. So they're holding the wreath, and you have the image of Christ in the middle, the monogram. But what helped me actually was looking at these, which are kind of obviously related, but then also these scarab images where you have this one in particular, compositionally very successful and beautiful. Something about it's so attractive. It's a circle and it has these kind of wing-shaped, 1x3 type shapes on the other side. So I'm taking like compositional stuff and the way the feather, this is just such a wonderful work of art. You can see some of the influence in, for example, the wings of the angel and the overall kind of jewelry effect. Just to show, hopefully briefly, some of the progression in terms of, this is the initial, I have it in my sketchbook. This is maybe about, this might be 1.5 inches. It's very, very small. I start my compositional sketches extremely small because I found if something works small, it'll work big. Sometimes I'll do a painting for a space, I've done painting 20 feet, and I'll start off this small. Because if something works small, you have to it has to have a simplicity to it. And then once you have that basic kind of architecture and shapes that work, then you can kind of start filling it up. And obviously there's a lot of things filled in there. I wanted this psalm in the mix. Oh, send forth your light and your truth. Let these be my guide. Let them bring me to your holy mountain, to the place where you dwell. That is, the Latin is on the scroll there. Which was really cool because I often will have this little debate in my head if to do things in Latin or English, and I often opt towards English because I just think legibility is important in liturgical art. But when you have a text that was translated by St. Jerome's, St. Jerome, he would have translated those specific words for the Vulgate. I thought it would be really cool to use the Latin because he would have written those words down. Next, I moved to the color study. And again, starting very basically, this is just marker. There's 4 colors, really, 5 colors. Right, blue, green, red, white, and a little touch of yellow or gold. And again, it's like this container that if you have kind of a basic color study, then you can start filling in the little stuff. Next to the line drawing, I brought the line drawing over there with the border for people to take a look at. And a second color study, you can see I changed the border. And then the final piece. More stuff for the video. And let's see, one thing I had about, I won't get into too much about the material, I guess very briefly. So this is all pieces of cut paper. So my process is, so everything here is a little piece of paper. There's maybe hundreds of little pieces of paper in here. When you come up close, you can see that. You can see that here. Every little thing is tiny little pieces of paper. It took a long time. It took a very long time. It was and this is something new to me. I trained in very classical painting. I studied with a guy, went back to the Renaissance, highly realistic painting. So I don't really know what to call this piece even. When I tell people it's like a liturgical collage, like even I feel a little gross saying that. It's just like, that is a weird, like I just picture felt banners and things, but when I look at it, I'm happy with it. And somehow it just kind of came out as collage. I started working in collage, that's a story for another day, about a year ago. And yeah, this was a real pleasure to work on. So now to get into just some ideas about image making. Yeah, please. Yes.
I noticed that looks in the background of your picture. It looks like the St. Jerome Church across the street.
Does it? Wow, it does. I decided to use that, when I was talking about architecture earlier, behind the saints, I decided to use the facade of St. Jerome's. And honestly, I was a little bit worried. I think in the proposal I sent Angela, I didn't include a color study because I didn't want people to be like, wait, why is our church green? I knew I had to pull it off enough that that wasn't a glaring thing. I think it worked. No one has complained directly to me. But it just worked compositionally. I just liked it a lot, making it green. And that's part of also elevating something into more imaginary space is, to me, important. So my kind of ideas about image making, I had to sit down and put this together ahead of this talk. I think these 3 words actually just came to me today. I've been working on this for years, but my brain doesn't work in terms of words. It's very geometric. So it's something, I remember I gave a talk years ago and I used different words, but when these came to me today, I was like, okay, that's actually what I'm doing in terms of my approach to image making. So purgation, imagination, incarnation. And these are analogous to, if you've heard about the 3 stages of the spiritual life, the purgative, the illuminative, and the unitive. It's just a slight adjustment on that for image making. And this is the shape in which I think about them. It's a triangle, it's an ascending mountain here. And this was a sketch I did. I delivered a presentation at Baylor years ago, and I used purgation, illumination, and unification directly. I do think the words I've developed now are a little bit better. So where this came to me was in part from reading a commentary on the Life of Moses by Gregory of Nyssa, which is a commentary on Exodus. And I've drawn a lot from the church fathers. There's something about the way that they see the world that resonates with me, just in terms of the way that they see the patterns and the symbols, I think is beautiful. So he has this passage where he's describing Moses' ascent and descent of Sinai. So I grabbed some quotations. In the first part of the life of Moses, he has this retelling of Exodus, which for the most part is quite faithful, but it also has some imaginary elements. In the second part of the life of Moses, he then does his exegesis of the the first part. And what I love about it is it's really not a moral enterprise. He's really pulling out these structural and imaginative aspects to the text that are kind of foundational and what the morals are kind of built on. So if you can picture Moses going up the mountain, I'm going to read these. I'm going to try to do it a little quickly here. Then the clear light, and if you want, close your eyes, but at least try to picture this scene of Moses. They're out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. This is now the third month. I think it says the third moon since they've been out of Egypt. They're in the desert. Then the clear light of the atmosphere was darkened so that the mountain became invisible, wrapped in a dark cloud. A fire shining out of the darkness presented a fearful sight to those who saw it. It hovered all around the sides of the mountain so that everything which one could see smoldered with the smoke from the surrounding fire. Moses led the people to the slope, not without fear himself of the sight. He's walking up the mountain, purgation. He boldly approached the very darkness itself and entered the invisible things where he was no longer seen by those watching. After he entered the inner sanctuary of the divine mystical doctrine, there, while not being seen, he was in company with the invisible. I'm jumping around here. With his mind purified by these laws, he's just been presented the laws, but also, as we'll see, other things, as it were. He was led to the higher initiation. This is what he says is higher than the law. When we're told this story, we always just focus on the tablets and the 10 Commandments. I was reading a writer recently who was saying, why do we make so much of the 10 Commandments, and especially in American Christianity? Like, it's what we put in schools. I think there was a school trying to legislate putting that on the wall or something like that. When we have the Sermon on the Mount, right? And it's because the 10 Commandments are a lot easier than the Sermon on the Mount, I think. But above the laws in his mind, he says, he was led to the higher initiation where a tabernacle was all at once shown to him by divine power. The tabernacle was a sanctuary with beauty of indescribable varieties, entrances, pillars, and curtains, table, candlestick, and an altar of incense, the altar of holocaust, and the propitiatory, and the inaccessible and unapproachable Holy of Holies. So their beauty and arrangement might not be forgotten, it might be shown to those below. He was counseled not to represent these things in mere writing, but to imitate them in material construction, that immaterial creation, employing the most splendid and radiant materials found on earth. I remember reading this. I went to a great little Charlotte Mason, solidly Protestant school, and so I actually read the Bible, and it was beautiful. And I remember we read Exodus, I think it was first grade, and I was so enamored by this scene, and specifically because after God himself presents these architectural designs of these various small instruments of the temple, which is a wild thought in itself, he says, I have designated Oliab and Bezalel, I can't pronounce their names, but essentially there's two guys, and they will make it for you. I have filled them with my spirit. He's inspired these two men. And I remember being a kid, I want to be one of those guys. I remember praying, actually, I want to be one of those guys. God can just do that, I want that. Two of the most fascinating figures in Christianity. I encourage you to reread that part of the Exodus. So let's just look at a few things. I just get excited at thinking about this. So I'm going to look at those three stages. Again, so we have the ascent up the mountain, which I'm arguing is what I would call similar to the purgative aspect, and the initiation of the top, which we're going to talk about imagination and memory, and then the descent down, which would be something of the realm of incarnation or unitive. And to do so, we're going to look at three paintings by El Greco. These are all at the National Gallery. And last time I was there, I was asked to do a grad student seminar. And so, of course, the day before, I went to the gallery and decided to figure out what I was going to talk about. And they were reading book 10 of the Confessions as part of the seminar at Catholic U. And so I read book 10 of it. And this was soon after the gallery was reopened after COVID. And they had reshuffled the paintings. And they decided to put these paintings on a wall next to each other. The order is actually, St. Jerome is on this side. And so you have St. Jerome over there. You have Our Lady with St. Agnes and St. Macrina, and the St. Martin. And these are all in the National Gallery, and I encourage you to take a look. had the opportunity to work in the National Gallery and do a copy of the central painting. I included some pictures on here at the end. And I think they illustrate these stages. So to look first at our good friend, St. Jerome. Can everyone see that, by the way? Do I need to move anything, or can you guys see it all right? Okay. So I'll give you just a few seconds here to take a look at this painting. We're going to do a kind of picture study here. So one of the first things to look at when looking at a painting for me is just the overall compositional, what's happening compositionally, that's kind of the gesture or thrust of the painting, and we're going to look at that with all three paintings. So if you can, for a moment, try to think, what is the overall compositional movement here? Does anyone want to venture? Do you want to guess? What do you see here? What is the movement in this painting?
He looks like a hermit from how he looks. He's not wearing much clothing. It looks at this time he's still working on translating the Bible. He's in a cave.
That is fantastic. So I don't know if you heard of it. She said he is a hermit. He is still translating the Bible, and he's in a cave, which is fantastic. So actually, she reminded me that the first thing before looking at the gesture is actually to look at what actually is the painting of, which I call like the stock image description of the painting. Like, that's something not to ignore. And we just had, yes?
He's also an older man from looking at his face.
He does look quite old. But what's interesting is his body, well, we'll get to that. So he's coming out of a cave, as we heard. He's a hermit. He's translating the Bible. So obviously you have the imagery of coming out of a cave, which has always been, it's this new birth imagery. You have Plato's allegory of the cave, which El Greco would have been very aware of and would have read, certainly, which is on full display here. And he is portrayed as an old man, but there's something interesting about his body. It's like emaciated, but there's also kind of vigor to it, right? There's something about it that especially when you're in the gallery and you look at it, because it's larger than this, if he stood up, he would be huge. Like the other day, I went to a 7-Eleven in Chain Bridge, and what is his name? Anyway, he was one of the 90s classic NBA stars. And he opened the door as I walked in. I just couldn't believe how big he was. This would be even bigger. He's massive, his scale. No, he's the coach. He was the coach at the Hoyas. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Patrick Ewing. That was kind of cool. But to get back to the painting, so the overall gesture here is, it's this kind of bowstring thing going on here, and it's kind of pointed up that way. And what it does is it creates this incredible tension in the painting, right? You feel it. You feel it in his body. And so then to notice a little bit about his figure, you have that emancipated figure, and what you'll notice is there's some obvious things that are enlarged, right? So first, his ear is massive. Second, his nose is quite large. His chest area, it looks like something's about to pop out of his chest. And if you noticed his hands, they're grabbing the cave. They're like super. And so, like, to me, this painting is so powerful because he's obviously, we think of hermits as retreating from the world, yes?
Also, the artist made it clear that he hasn't eaten in a while.
I was just about to say that. So it's obviously clear that he's been fasting and he's retreating from the world. And people will think of that as just that. Monks are just trying to get out of the world. They didn't like the world. They just wanted to be in the desert. But there's a way in which El Greco is showing us that purgative aspect of fasting is actually, he's grabbing the cave. His ear is enlarged because he can hear more. And if you've ever been really hungry for a long period of time or fasted, you'll notice your senses are like, you're on like spidey sense, right? So his ear is hearing more, his nose is smelling more, his eye is looking more. It's actually sharpening his senses. This like retreat out of the things of the sensible is actually heightening his senses. And these are physical symbols or designations of heightening also the spiritual senses, right? He's looking at the spiritual light. So that's something to keep in mind with this purgative thing we're going to be talking about here. I'm going to read quickly this quote. I'm going to start. You know what? Where do I want to start on this one? I'll skip over that one. So it's a fantastic essay from Pieper, Learning How to See Again. I'm not seeing actually where I wanted to. I think I grabbed the wrong page. But the whole essay is fantastic. It's quite short, but his point on that essay is we're losing the ability to see. And he has this beautiful little. Let me see if I can. I'll just summarize it because it'll take me. I'll be poking around files on my laptop and it won't be enjoyable. He talks about modern man is losing their ability to see, and he makes the argument he's sitting on the. I'm going to paraphrase this for like a modern version. He's sitting in an Uber, and the guy next to him is just like on his phone. He was really sitting on a transatlantic ship, and he was noticing no one was looking at the sea. And he says that this modern world of screens and television and music, it's this like. You expect actually us to be heightening our ability and our senses to look and perceive the world, but it's quite obviously the opposite. There's so much noise that we can't get through it. We can't look at things. I myself am like this. I was on campus the other day at CUA. I was just walking through and there was, I rounded this corner and the sun was coming through this tree with these red leaves, and it was so remarkably beautiful. And I looked on it and kept walking. And then I stopped myself and I walked back to that spot and I had to force myself to look at it because I knew it was beautiful. And it was like actively painful for the first like 30 seconds. And I'm like an artist that does this for a living, but it took me so much to just sit still, shut up, and look at something. It is so hard for us to do that. And for children, especially ones that have grown up in the digital age, that is all the more the case. But stopping, really looking at things. But one of the things that will help you cultivate that ability to see, argues Pieper in this essay and another essay called The Concupiscence of the Eyes, is a visual, and Ratzinger makes the same point, visual fasting. Someone explained to me, they said, do you think that actually I think this was a lecture from Jonathan Pajot. He said, do you think that the billionaire who eats sumptuously every night enjoys his meal more than the monk who's just fasted for a month and comes back and enjoys a piece of bread? He's like, even the point that the monk wasn't doing this to have a culinary experience, but it's one of those kind of gifts. It's a reflection of the spiritual capacity that's been developed in the fasting, is you actually do enjoy the material world more. So personally, how I practice that is I don't watch shows and movies, really. It's been probably over a year and a half since I've watched any show or movie, and over the past, 5 years, it's always been, I could count on one hand the amount that I've seen in any given year. I just don't, and it's not like a moral thing. It's not like because I think movies are bad or shows are bad. I think film is an incredibly powerful art form, and that's why I refrain from it, because I'm an image maker, and I can't, when I watch a movie, the last time I watched a movie, it occupies so much space in my mind. It impresses itself so deeply that when I go out and look at works of art or nature, they don't compare. They can't present themselves into the material of my mind deep enough because a movie is taking up so much space. There's like a power to movies that we don't realize how incredibly strong it is. Like, it's so much more powerful than looking at a painting or going to a play. But it's like a brute force in a way that just kind of enters a kid's mind. And so I encourage, if you're a parent, to think about that approach to movies and things. It's not like about filtering bad stuff. That's an obvious. Obviously, you shouldn't be showing yourself bad stuff. It's about filtering strong images. So it might be like a great little movie about St. Francis Xavier, and there's talking animals, and he's talking to Brother Munn, and it's just really wonderful. And the kid watches it, really enjoys it, and there's some scripture in it, and there's a great message. But then the kid goes outside, and the sun's not talking to him, the trees aren't talking to him. He's just bored by creation, right? This is what Plato talks about in terms of secondary and kind of, this is one of the reasons he doesn't include the artist in a way in the city, is it's twice removed, and that's a whole conversation. But as parents, I think about that in terms of, imagery. You want to cultivate wonder. And movies and shows, in particular movies and shows, will do that. Will squash it faster than others. Nature documentaries could be one way to mitigate that. Really slow shows, if you will. We in our house, our kids watch Little Bear, Marie Sendak. It's wonderful. Nothing ever happens. It's like the best show. It's very slow. It's scored classically. It's hand drawn, I think. That versus like whatever crack pipe show that they're producing now. Like, it's just the kids stuff is like, it's like snorting something, the way that they present the image. It's so loud and colorful. It's like, it's insane. Right, kids? No. So then the second stage, now we're at the top of the mountain with Moses. And I'll just kind of go through this a little quicker. The basic shape of this one, the basic gesture. Well, first of all, let's talk about what's happening here. Do you know what's happening? Do you know who these people are?
Mary's baby Jesus.
Yep.
Mary's baby Jesus, and then it looks like at the bottom it's two spades that he told us.
And what is she holding?
A lamb, and then there's a lion right there.
Can you tell? This is a little hard to tell. Can you tell what this is?
Maybe a feather or something?
It's a palm branch. So this is St. Agnes, who's associated with the lamb, and this is St. Macrina. And when I was looking at this painting in the National Gallery, I realized something interesting is St. Macrina is holding a palm branch. A palm branch, if you understand the language, is an image of martyrs. But St. Agnes was also a martyr. Why isn't she holding a palm branch? And then I was looking at it. Well, what's interesting is she's looking at her. She's specifically looking at her hand. She's looking at, Mary's looking at the Christ. Everyone else is looking at the Christ child, essentially. But she's not. What's going on with St. Agnes here? And I had this little thought that I think what's happening, and I looked up the lives. They're both martyrs, and they both have parallel stories. The classic early church, bad husband, kills them, the deal. Very parallel lives, but she lived 50 or 100 years previous to her. So I think this is St. Agnes reflecting on St. Macrina, who's beholding our Lord. And so to me, this is a movement of St. Agnes, actually an interior vision into her memory where Christ resides, and her access to see Christ is actually through the life of Macrina. So you can see the way in which these images ascend. I'm going to read this one. I do have the right quote. I'm going to start right up here. It's kind of tiny. This is Book 10 of the Confessions, just to give you an idea of imagination and memory. So I must go beyond this natural faculty of mine, and I rise by stages towards the God who made me. The next stage is memory, which is like a great field or spacious palace, a storehouse for countless images of all kinds which are conveyed to it by the senses. In it are stored away all the thoughts by which we enlarge upon or diminish or modify in any way the perceptions at which we arrive through the senses. And it also contains anything else that has been entrusted to it for the safekeeping, until such a time as these are swallowed up and buried in forgetfulness. When I use my memory, I ask it to produce whatever it is that I wish to remember. Some things it produces immediately. Some after forethought, only after delay, as though they were being brought out from some inner hiding place. Others come spilling from the memory, thrusting themselves upon us when what we want is something quite different, as much as to say, perhaps we are what you want us to remember. We are what you want to remember. These I brush aside from the picture which memory presents to me, allowing my mind to pick what it chooses until finally that which I wish to see stands out clearly and emerges into sight from its hiding place. There's this other image from Augustine where he talks about the hand of the mind. I kind of like searching through, there's this quote from Maximus the Confessor where he describes the human being as that capacious storehouse, that capacious workshop of all things. There's a wonderful way in which the medievals had this idea of the craft of mind, not Minecraft, the craft of mind. And they saw like mental image making as like a building, and they were extremely intentional. This is so much of what monastic life was in some sense around, the mind palace stuff is the most famous, but building these like really physical spaces in their mind and storing things and building things. I found myself to be extremely helpful with image making, where so instead of watching a movie, I'll look at the things that I want to be elements in my painting. I'll have that kernel of the concept, And I'll kind of saturate myself by looking at these examples and spend like a week looking at these things and allow myself to kind of formulate it in my head. And then I'll keep it in my head until it's strong enough to get out onto the paper. Getting it out too early is almost like a premature birth. It doesn't quite land, to use a very dark image, but allowing things to kind of gestate and kind of come together around that little kernel. And I used the word concept earlier intentionally because concept making is like conception. There's something kind of physical that comes together in a kind of friction and meeting of things, and at a certain point, that physical activity, something spiritual is dropped in and something new happens, like in conception. Whenever you're conceptualizing anything, I argue that that is a similar process by which you are doing so. These visual things enter your mind, and people like Aquinas will argue physically, in a way, are imprinted into your mind, these phantasms, and they reside in your mind. But in order to make them intelligible, a certain light has to be shown on them from on high that then gathers these things together. Let's use an example, looking at the hat there. How do I even recognize it as a hat? Because if I'm looking at it, there's like an infinite amount of just like colors and shapes and things. For me to see the hat, I have to conceptualize hat. And so there's something of the material of what I'm looking at, the light coming into my head, and a concept from on high, or the seed of a concept from on high, coming together to gather that so that I can even conceptualize it as a hat. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. On to the last stage here. How am I doing with time? Am I way over, or? Okay.
It's 8:24.
Okay. Are you guys fine? Yeah. All right. Let me know if you're not. So the last stage, the incarnational or unitive. So this, well, our resident art historian over here. Oh, you're just stretching. Come on. Yeah, you'll give her a break. Does anyone else want to take a guess? It's also written right here. What's happening here? All right, we're going to go with your brother. It's your chance, buddy.
I think it's in one of the tours, and I see like the beggar, and I see he has a sword, and he's like, and there's a green cloth.
Where
My guess is that he's about to cut it.
do these kids go to school? I don't know where they're getting this. This is impressive. This is St. Martin de Tours. This is not a plant. I did not plant these kids. Oh, and she had it, of course. Do you have a further detail?
Yes.
You got a one up. What do you see?
From here, like it's obvious here that he's rich. And it also seems weird that this is probably in Roman times. So why would they have the ruffles there? So they probably did that at a different time and had a different idea of how he looked.
So I'm guessing most of you didn't even notice that. So St. Martin is portrayed as a 16th century Spanish noble. So he's portrayed as a noble Spanish man. He's not portrayed as the early church martyr or saint that he was. So what's happening here? I'm just stunned by this knowledge. You have something here?
Yeah, I see a bandage on the beggar's foot.
I've actually never noticed that. The bandage on his foot. I have an idea about that. I'm gonna come back to that actually. That fits with my reading this painting. So what's happening here compositionally is you have a very strong vertical from the top of his head down to the hoof, and you have an extremely strong horizontal going from the snout, the sword. It's very unusual to have a line cutting across a canvas like that compositionally over to the shoulder. So we have a cross. And when I was looking at this painting, what is wonderful is, a couple of things. One is that it is set in, as we heard, 15th, 16th century Spain, specifically Toledo, which is where El Greco's from. Or not from, but it's where he landed at the end. And I was looking at the painting and I was struck by the beggar. There's really a way in which the beggar almost comes across as more interesting and more of a central figure than St. Martin, right? There's something of the way that he really reads powerfully, and it looks almost as though the perspective is really interesting because it's almost looks like he's leading St. Martin. He's almost coming forth. His hand is pointing like this. This whole posture might look familiar from iconography of the resurrection and the transfiguration of Jesus. This pose where you have this kind of movement and this hand, and you have the cloth moving around him like bandages. That is exactly how he's portrayed in iconography of the time, which El Greco was trained as an iconographer in Crete, so he's obviously very aware of that. So he's portrayed in this very Christological way. And then I went back, and I didn't have the education these kids did, so I had to learn the story a little bit better. And the story is St. Martin one day was out riding, and he encounters a beggar, and it's extremely cold. I forget what region this was, but it was quite north. And the men are kind of passing by, the men he was a military figure, and he comes by and he cuts his military coat, which is like, we just think, oh, he's cutting the fabric, but like this is his coat for like the whole campaign, right? He's not gonna get another one for a long time. He cuts it in half and gives it to this man, very scriptural. And the next night as he's sleeping, he has a dream where Christ comes to him and says, essentially, thank you for the cloth. So he's seeing Christ. So I want to read this passage here, again, also from Book 10. Augustine in his Confessions talking to our Lord. You have walked everywhere at my side, O truth. Teach me what to seek and what to avoid. Whenever I laid before you the things that I was able to see in this world below, and you asked to counsel me, as far as my eyes enabled me to do so, I surveyed the world about me and explored both the life which my body has from me and the senses themselves. Next, I probed the depths of my memory, so vast its ramifications and filled in so wonderful a way with riches beyond number. I scrutinized all these things and stood back in awe, for without you I could see none of them. And then I found that none of them was you, nor was I myself the truth. I who found them, I who explored them all and tried to distinguish and appraise each according to its worth. So I want to reframe a little bit this image of the mountain as we close here. I'm trying to think the best way to do so. Because as I mentioned, these three stages are what I use in the studio, but they're also, I'm stealing them from the three stages of the spiritual life. There's a way in which you just need to purge yourself of the sensible things and enter into the darkness, which is why there's such a emphasis in the tradition on silence and darkness, especially in the early church. It almost bothered me for the longest time as an artist. It's always we have to move beyond images, and we have to move beyond the senses. And I was what isn't creation good? When we want to be in creation? There's emphasis we have to move into this darkness, especially if you get to people like Dionysius the Areopagite and these apophatic theologies, and it's just trying to always push beyond into this dark space, and then that's where you encounter God, in that still small whisper. And then I've discovered through, a lot of life experience in dark times that really is where you encounter God, is in that darkness. And it's also where new things come from. Again, that analogy with conception. There's something about the darkness, and there's something about that path of humility where if you really can take away those sensible things and move past them in order to reach that summit of the mountain, which is where the mind of Christ resides, and you can enter into that place of humility, that's when you can encounter the divine concepts. I forgot to mention something earlier, which is the distinction between creating and making, and this might tie things together a little bit. So, in the modern world, we think of them as analogous. Making things and creating things are just kind of two different words for the same thing. That would have been anathema up until 16th or 17th century. Creativity and creation was solely designated for God, and even just for God the Father. And it was this beautiful understanding of the distinction between the two. So there's a whole fascinating thing with iconography as well that shifts around the Renaissance in terms of the way in which Genesis is depicted. But essentially, if making has these three elements of the artist, the concept, and the medium, creating, being analogous to that, is similar because creating is making out of nothing. This is kind of using words a little bit lightly and playfully. So it's creating is making something out of nothing. So what is the medium? It's nothing. In order to create something out of nothing, you need everything. So you need an artist who is all things, who is being itself, but you also need both an infinite artist with an infinite concept. And so this brings us to John 1 and the way in which Christians understood all things were made through him and in him and with him, is that God the Father is this divine artist, and Christ himself is the concept. He is the plan of the box before it's made. That's not why in the case of the box, the plan exists almost in a sense, and it's ordered to the existence of the box. That's not why creation happened. But there is a way in which Christ is the divine concept. He is infinite and yet conceived in a way, and then conceived into our reality. And all of creation is this work of art. So on the first day, God creates this prime matter, the heaven and the earth, the everything. And then it's an act of making, unwinding, pulling things together. It's really like the language is very gritty and like very artistic to me. The idea of water is chaos. It's like a sculptor. A sculptor needs water to move things around. There's all this like very language of, but God throughout the whole thing has an idea, a concept in his mind of what he's making, which is the Logos. And we are told that it is what he's made is good, and it's good in so much that it reflects the Logos. It is separate, it is distinct, it is infinitely lower, but it reflects it in the same way that if I have an idea for a painting, this will reflect that in a way. All of creation reflects the Logos. And then we're told man is made in the image and likeness of God, so man himself is a microcosm, and creation is a macrocosm, both of the divine concept. And the role of art for us Christians and for us human beings is to connect heaven and earth. It's so we can ascend up the mountain and encounter the infinite artist, the infinite concept, the image of God, the image of ourselves. We have to know what we are and where we're going in order to be prudent. I have to know, if I'm Kevin, I have to know who is the perfect Kevin, who is the Kevin that's meant to be, if I'm going to make myself into that. And so prudence as an act of making necessitates a reception of the image of yourself. But also there's a way in which as Christians we believe that material creation is good and was from the beginning and always will be in the new heaven and the new earth. In what way does earth enter into the new kingdom if not by the art of man? God the Father at the beginning invites man into the garden to complete the act of creation with him. He doesn't need that, but he wants to bring man along as a kind of little apprentice. And he's told, okay, I've done all this work. I just need you to cultivate, to till. Like, it's small. Like, just don't mess this up. I want you to enjoy this in the way that I enjoy it. I'm keeping you here to do that. Here's the whole plan. Here's the vision of this thing. Maybe not the whole plan. You're not ready for the whole plan. Don't eat from this tree. But just take care of everything else. And what does the gardener do? He says, well, maybe I know more than the guy who owns the place. I have an idea. I want to change something. I'm gonna take this plan for myself. And all of a sudden now the plan explodes. There's a disfigurement of the very order and harmony and reflection of the Logos into creation and in man himself that is marred. Now Christ enters into creation to show man, this is beautiful imagery in the Fathers of using artistic language, the original prototype, like you have a painting that's been marred. So the sitter comes back. It's like, this is what it's supposed to look like. So he like re-imprints man. He like shows him, hey, this is the concept here. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And then man is like reinitiated into that. All of art should be about ascending that mountain, receiving the concept from on high, reflecting on Christ, and then really making it in the world. At the end, Gregory of Nyssa talks about Moses coming down the mountain, and he says, no, it's not just that he received this pattern of the temple and it's a great like theological image that's really interesting. It's like, no, you gotta go build it. And I think that is, parents and educators, I'll finish on this, is something that we need to instill in our children and students, is it's great to study the things of Western, the Western classics. It's great to study the things of the faith, to have these, to ascend the mountain and receive these wonderful patterns of the universe and the way in which it unfolds. But at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, which is this reascending of the mountain, Jesus says you must be doers, not just hearers of the word. Like, you got to go build this, guys. And if we don't see like our work as an extension of making the things that we're learning about, we are not participating. We're being bad gardeners. I'll finish with that. I've been going on here. So I guess I'll kind of close, and then I would love to, if people, if anyone wants to get up or leave, feel free to do so, but I would love to hear you guys actually, any questions or thoughts or critiques or anything about the painting. As a painter, there's so many times where I do a painting and I have to like ship it off somewhere and I never get to see what people think about it. So I'm like gonna use this time selfishly because I would love to hear, and maybe that'll also help me explain some elements in the painting. But I don't know if anyone has any. We'll start with our resident questioner here, interrogator.
There was something else that you said earlier
Uh-huh.
about when people talk to God in darkness. It reminded me of a prayer one of my brothers was in third grade. My teacher had us memorize some prayers.
Okay, do you remember it?
If my brother can help me that out.
Third grade?
Yeah.
All right, can you recite it for us? Do you want to come up here? There we go. Here, you guys. All right. Can you do it?
Yep.
All right. You don't have to get it perfect the first time. Go ahead.
It's part of the Canticle of Zechariah. Me and my brother learned this in school. It says, "The dawn of our high shall break upon us and shine on those who dwell in the darkness and shadow of death,
and to
guide our feet into the way of peace."
That's the last few lines of the Canticle of Zechariah.
Wow, thank you guys. That was so that line was actually a main inspiration for this painting. Truly, I had this image in my head. So the dawn from on high breaking upon us, and your feet being guided into the way of peace. That was actually, it was that and the Phaedrus actually were the main kind of textual inspirations for this. Do you have a question or thought or speech?
As you said earlier, this is made out of real pieces of paper.
Yes.
I think it's most likely to be a mosaic.
Yes, that is absolutely right. So I find myself more inspired by mosaics and stained glass windows than paintings often. So this is very much inspired by mosaics. A lot of what I was looking at, and there's something in mosaics where you have this like powerful invitation to, like there's something in mosaics that really acknowledges like the humanity of the viewer. Because like something about a painting, like it's all kind of done for you, and it's kind of, it can be like a lecture. It's just kind of like, look at this beautiful thing I did. But there's something about a mosaic where it's like, you have to kind of put this together, and I trust you as a viewer to kind of do that visually. And so that's actually exactly what I was trying to pull off with this cut paper thing, was that I was really inspired by Eric Carle. I'll tell people, like, you know Eric Carle? And they'll be like, Eric, I don't know. It's like, you know Eric Carle. Everyone knows Eric Carle. The Hungry Caterpillar. I love his work. I think it's brilliant. And I was looking at stuff that printed well, that read well, that was good for kids. And so I thought, what if Eric Carle, was a scholastic? That was kind of my approach with this one. Any questions about any specific imagery or, yep?
I have a couple. So in
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. My wife probably remembers better than I do. She's my critic because they were there up until the very end. I even cut out some. You can see them up top here. I even had cut up some, and I placed something that was cool about this painting is I could try stuff. I can move stuff around. So I put the stars up there, and I decided against it. I saved it for the end. I usually put stars in all my paintings. There's something about them that resonates on a lot of levels, but there's also something that's a convenient compositional trick, because let's say your composition is a little off balanced. Just throw a couple stars on one side. Yeah. But at the end of this one, yeah. So I put the stars in there, and I guess because I had made everything else is so loud in a lot of ways. My wife said, this is kind of like a quiet part of the painting. You kind of really need that little bit of rest visually. And as always, she was right. I really wanted to put them in. I was like, I wanted my stars. And I decided to like sit on it for a day, and then I looked at it again. I left it out with the stars on it. I was like, darn it, she's right. I can't do the stars. It was the same thing with the border, because I had them in the border as well. It was like the movement of the angels was thrown off with like you didn't get as much of the kind of dance with the angels when you had the stars in there as well. The border is very much inspired by Denis the Areopagite and his thing on celestial hierarchies and his like idea of angels kind of ascending and descending and kind of communicating and dancing, and that twirling imagery also, as I mentioned, Phaedrus by Plato, that was kind of another little source of inspiration. Any other, yes?
I had a question on the bottom with like the dragon and
The peacock here?
peacock,
Yeah, this was really, really fun. I put, let's see if I can try to pull this up quickly. Well, you'll get to see here a few of the pictures that were inspired. Just some of the source material here. I can go through any of these, but this is, I want to say kind of almost 9th century Mozan or Mozarabic manuscript. And then here's another one at the bottom. Let's see here. I loved that when I saw it. I was like, I need that tattoo. The peacock in medieval art represents the resurrection. There was a medieval thought that if someone ate the flesh of a peacock, they would live forever. I haven't tried it yet. And so the peacock then became an image of resurrection, and the serpent is, of course, an image of death. I wanted to, in my painting, so this is a kind of, I don't know, allegory or something of study, and I wanted to portray, at least for me, when I pursue any kind of study, at the beginning there's a kind of like a fight between like virtue and vice in a sense, and it kind of like, there's that initial like, I gotta, I want to check something or do something else. And so I want to kind of, at the base of study, there's this kind of like spiritual battle between vice and virtue, kind of at the bottom, almost like the passions interacting there. So that was kind of the inspiration. But really, I just thought it would look cool. That was really what it came down to. The bottom here is something I've loved for years, is inspired by teepee art from the Plains Indians. They'll have this beautiful, teepees have this wonderful visual language, but often at the bottom they'll have these triangles with the dots that'll represent the earth. And if you can't see it up here, up top here is a cross. This was the morning star. And to me, the teepee had such an integrity as a cosmological image, moving from, and you would have kind of patterns of man hunting animals, but the top was this cross. And I've always thought that, sacred art, as it could enter into a Roman tradition, can enter into any intact tradition so much it is real. And insofar as America has any kind of visual language, it was probably made by the people that we killed. There was a really kind of an integral symbolic language. And unfortunately, because of the people in the time of our founding, we don't have that because we're kind of founded by iconoclasts and Puritans, and then Catholics trying to be like that. So there's not really a lot of American, it might be emerging, mega hats or something, but there's not that, that's why I find myself reaching back there, I guess. Yeah, any other questions or, yep. Oh, let me go first and then second, yeah.
So none of the lines are paint, they're all paper.
Everything's paper.
Okay, and all the paper's the same weight?
Different weights. There's a lot of different weights, yeah.
About how much, if you give us like a rough percentage, of your rendering is done with a knife and how much is done with like a sketch before?
Yeah, so my process is I do those small sketches. Let me see. I can show people my notebook afterwards. But, and then I use a printer often. And I do very detailed line drawings. And so this would be one of them. And again, I'm doing versions and versions and versions and versions. But you can see a lot of the stuff starting to develop in this one. And then what I did is after I had the line drawings, I photocopied them. So I'd make a lot of photocopies. I would, so previous to that, I painted a bunch of paper, these different colors. Like this room in our house is just like strewn, like it just looks crazy, like pieces, scraps everywhere. You can ask my wife about that. So then I took that paper that I had painted and I put the photocopy on top of it and I cut out the shapes. So for example, every little detail in here will have, you can see that, for example, like let's look at the pillar, So it took a lot of like foresight and planning because it's layered. So some of this stuff is like, we're probably, some of it's almost like close to like 20 pieces thick. Like there's a lot, some of it's really, I hope people can come up because it's really like it comes out like a relief in a lot of areas just because of the layers. And there's a fun way to play with that. I'll let you guys know in on a secret. The only thing that is I kind of, in some ways, cheated on is underneath the scroll, there's a couple layers of paper, but the bottom one, I did not cut out those letters. That is something I printed onto the paper. I did design the font, so I did design that font, but that's a little secret. So that's the one thing in the whole painting that's not just a single, piece of paper. So now you guys know. Yep.
So when you were saying you painted it, so you did the marbling on the column then?
Yeah, so I did that on a piece of paper. Yeah, and it was so fun too, because it was like, I had an idea of what the things and effects I wanted, but then it was so much it was finding the right piece of paper. So I'd be like, I look like a crazy man, like on the, like just stacks of paper, like, yeah, like trying to find the right, like the marbling I was like, I need to find the right, little corner, and then I would, put the little piece of paper. Sometimes I would trace out shapes too, so I could see, so I have it, for example, I'd trace out this rectangle, and then I would, look at the big paper that I'd marbled, and I'd try to find where I liked on it, cut it out.
So
like,
each of those, so all the red in his cloak and purples and
yeah.
his cloak, those are all from pieces you painted with the different colors?
Yep. Yeah. That was super fun. And again, I should have included some pictures. Oh, I did actually at the end of this, of some of my other work, just to show some of the difference. I think at the end of my, let's see. We're gonna relive the dream here. Let's go. At the very end, I believe I included recap. Oh, some pictures of getting to copy this painting. So this is in the National Gallery. There's a program, a long-standing program, I think from the 19th century, called the Copyist Program, which is just this wonderful thing where you can apply, and there's an interview, and a portfolio review, and you can be approved as a copyist at the gallery. And you get a locker, and it's down in the basement, and it's like, you bring in a canvas, they stamp it, just because, my painting was going to look exactly like El Greco, so to make sure people don't steal stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And then they give you a tarp, and then they're just like, do your thing, which is just so insane. Like I was so close to the painting with my, I'm using oil paints here. Like it was so amazing. Like, cause copying paintings is really one of the traditional ways of just learning it. And the teacher I studied with, who I apprenticed with, so after high school, I did an apprenticeship with a painter. I didn't go to college, I did that. And he studied with a painter, as I mentioned, going back to David, who's court painter of Napoleon, and people further than that. Just this long-standing, rigorous kind of lineage. And so when you copy a painting, my teacher Paul would say, it's like you were trying to get that artist into your hand. So, you knew a Michelangelo drawing, you're trying to copy it. It's not just like seeing it, it's like you kind of get the way that they move their hand. And El Greco is so interesting because the way he paints, there's no one like El Greco. Like when you look at Da Vinci, he's very systematic and you know exactly how he painted it in a way. In terms of, he did the line drawing, he did the grisaille, he did, like there's many layers, but there's like a very process. El Greco is something called a direct painter. You have indirect painting, which is layered, line drawing, monochrome, color. Direct painting is like the Impressionists, where you just start with just like color from the beginning. And El Greco really in some ways is an Impressionist. So just to look, so I decided to just copy a corner. And so direct painting takes a lot of faith because you're like, I don't know if I'm even close to what's happening here. And my painter would study would be like, it's like coming out of the fog. In the beginning, it's like, what the heck? It's so much easier to work from line drawings because you at least know it's going to look like something. When in direct painting, you're like, I don't know if this was going to work out. This is day one. Starting to get there. So it did kind of come together there at the end. And this is really just kind of like to learn. For example, one of the things I learned was the way that he pulled the contrast on that drapery is insane. Like it's almost just like 3 colors, but he sets it against such a dark tone. So there's just these little things like that he learned. The way he does flesh tones in his hands. I really wanted to do the hand well. There's certain things I didn't really copy, like the lamb. I wasn't particularly interested in the lamb, but the hand and the face, there's certain things I wanted to get. I copied a Chardin. And so I wanted to show that because it's so obviously different than this. And actually for my next commission, I decided to go into a kind of like a Roman wall painting style. I'm doing a commission of Odysseus for a school, a scene from the Odyssey. And so I'm trying something else. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I'll be needing, if anyone has any, it's a scene of the winnowing oar. And I'm happy to show people sketches if anyone wants. But you had a question or anyone else have a question?
I can ask a couple.
Please, yeah.
We're about to jump out of our chair.
Yeah. Your water. But yeah, what do you have go ahead.
No, I defer.
All right,
The expert.
please, resident expert. What did you give? Yes, we can. Let me see if I can do that. Just like, how does this work? That is a Mission Church in San Jose at the ceiling.
Thank you, I was wondering.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful space. I love mission architecture. So what's interesting is, these files are kind of like, the medievals would have had this in their head. They would have sorted through all this imagery in their head. I think the first step of any kind of recovery of a decent culture and arts is to just know where we are. And we are we're savages, like where we are compared to anyone else in like history. Like we really are. We just can't do things that other people did in the past. We've conceded so much of our humanity to machines that we are really like pathetic. And so I think for me, I'm always embarrassed by how much I have to rely on these things. But that's a starting place. Right here. Was it this one or the other one?
It doesn't really matter. Both show the same thing to me. It reminds me of a Bible passage from Genesis. He will strike at the head, and the snake will strike at the heel. It's the peacock's biting the head or the neck, and then the snake's wrapping himself around the heel, or where the heel would be on a human body.
That is brilliant. That is beautiful. I hope everyone can see what she's talking about. Yeah, I never thought about that. There is something really, like the pikecock really is a pretty kind of Marian bird in a lot of ways, I would say. In some ways not, but in some ways, yeah, that is, maybe that's I think that's exactly going, because it is kind of like, why would you wrap it specifically around his leg? But that's great.
Also, for some reason, the knot resembles how weak Satan is to Mary because of the knot. It's like Mary didn't need much force to tie the knot around.
Yeah,
Just like to tie a knot.
I see that. So our next speaker in the series will be right here. Maybe like a last question, and then we can hang out. Yeah. Did you raise this child?
No, this is all the school.
Oh, okay. I was gonna congratulate you, but yeah. Yes.
Actually, my dad and mom gets me a lot of books, so they help a lot.
Oh, wow.
To this school,
So it was your dad. Wow. You're raising him right.
I just want to.
You said earlier that where we go to school, and my answer is we go here.
There we go. Cheers to that.
About the angels. On the
Yes,
side.
please.
I
On
mean,
the
you already answered that. I was curious, is that what it was? But why those representations specifically? And you mentioned that this was your take on the hierarchy of angels.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that and what it's not a rainbow, but I want to know what the sort of ribbon, like the multicolored ribbon means.
Yeah, it is a rainbow. I throw in stars. I like putting rainbows in paintings. I'm all about reclaiming the rainbow. I like we need it back. It's such a beautiful imagery. It's all over the early church. So it's kind of, loosely based off the hierarchy of angels. For example, I didn't do like 9 different types. I thought about doing that. I don't think that's too much. But this image of, well, first of all, with angels, I have such a problem with how angels are usually portrayed in a lot of contemporary and then Renaissance art. Like, there's a way in which the Renaissance, there was in some ways, intentional movement there was an intentional movement to portray the angels like the pagan putti, the little babies, or in a harem. You can think like the creation of Adam. It's that kind of imagery of Zeus with his harem. And there was a kind of humanist bent in that of the ascension of man, and we're kind of bringing the angels down. But just on a basic level, what does a naked baby with wings portray theologically about the reality of angels? I think maybe something, but to me, when I'm reading, Dionysius or St. Thomas, I'm talking about angels. I'm like, this is not at all. And it actually becomes problematic in the children's imagination when we talk about them as such. Mm-hmm. Like they really are, like you're not going to be like counting on an angel, guarding the angel much, or asking for the intercession of the angel, the guidance of the angels, if you think of them like that. In the same way that imagery of God the Father is the Ancient of Days, the old man. I don't think that is resonant with the tradition largely, and it just is quite not very helpful way to conceptualize him, I think, for children. I think it's kind of hopefully run its course, some of those things. So I've always gravitated towards like biblical descriptions of angels, which are weird. They're like crazy, they're and then early church images of angels. So Ezekiel is great. That was kind of the wheels, wheels and wheels with wings, and just that sense of like otherworldliness. And there's different types, and they should make you feel a little uncomfortable and weird. And I wanted something of like this idea of him kind of dipping his toe into the darkness where he's encountering these divine concepts. Because I do think the angels are resonant with things like the divine ideas.
Please do a children's book with angels like that.
I would love to. I want to do a Genesis board book. That's like one of my dreams, is to do a Genesis board book, in this style, and to like Thomas and people have these wonderful ideas of how the angels were involved in creation, and putting them in would be really fun. I would love to. I also want to do Tobit, which has obviously Raphael. I want to do all the weird stories, parts of Daniel, Jonah, And one of my favorite, I need, if anyone wants to commission this scene, Habakkuk bringing lentils to Daniel. That scene is so it's like Daniel's in the lion's den. This doesn't make it into the children's books. And God speaks to his prophet Habakkuk, who's eating a bowl of lentils, and an angel picks him up by his hair and drags him to give Daniel the food. And I'm like, that's a great story. Like, I'm just so frustrated with so much of like Catholic like children's books and Bible. Like I can't buy my kid a children's Bible because they're either like just so like cuddly and inane and just like silly, or just like effeminate, essentially, the imageries of Christ, or just like really comfy, or they're just purely, even the ones that are extremely well done are very naturalistic, which has its role. But to me, what I want my kids, and I have some illustrations of stuff I want to do, but I was reading patristic theology or Ratzinger, and I was like, how do I communicate this to my kids? Like, this is the kind of Christianity I want. The really enchanted, powerful, kind of very full cosmos, not just this flat, the flat world of the modern world. But I think invoking and praying to the, asking the intercession of the angels is a way to start, and then also just stop painting them as naked babies. Probably the next place to go. Great. I'll be around. I'd love to hear more, but I'm going to let people go if they'd like to. But thank you guys. Thank you so much. This is great.
Is there one more time for Andrew? So before we continue fellowship and discussion, just wanted to thank a few parties. So first of all, the Parent Volunteer Corps for, of course, commissioning this wonderful piece of art. I want to thank Angela in particular for coming up with the idea for this event and then frankly executing all the logistics. I want to thank Francis Abbey for filming this for us, so we have this in the parish archives moving forward. And finally, I want to thank the Enriquez children for showing us the influence of St. Jerome.